This year sees the start of the tributes and commemoration of 100 years since the start of the First World War. There are many books and programmes being made about it. Joining me in the studio is local author Paul Hare, who's written several books on the subject, including, and I say this carefully, Fokker Fodder, Mount of Aces, and his latest, Britain's Forgotten Fighters of World War I. Paul, welcome. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
This latest book, Forgotten Fighters, what's that? We can think of a few of the aircraft that we know the names of who fought in World War I. The Sopwith Camel is bound to be the most famous.
Indeed.
What are some of the forgotten aircraft?
The forgotten fighters include such machines as the Bristol Scout, the Sopwith Tabloid, and later on the de Havilland 5, the Martinsyde Buzzard.
These are wonderful names.
They are indeed.
And they are. And when I was a little boy, I used to make all those Airfix models and everything. I thought I was fairly familiar with them. Why were these aircraft not as successful or not as famous as the Camel?
At the beginning of the war, the aeroplanes were designed as fast reconnaissance machines, simply as scouts, which was the word that was then applied to all fighter aeroplanes in that war, but they were unarmed. And when Germany introduced machines which had machine guns fitted, our aeroplanes were hastily armed by whatever means possible so that they could fight back against them. And they were reasonably successful, but were rapidly superseded by purpose-designed fighters, some of which are also included in the book as being less well known.
It's remarkable to think that people were sent up in aircraft in conflict without guns. I know there were problems with making the propellers turn in a particular rhythm that meant that the blades weren't shot off by machine gun fire going through the circumference of the propeller.
Indeed. The solution to that was to make the propeller fire the gun, in effect, which worked reasonably well, except that then if the pilot throttled down his engine, his gun slowed down too.
The German aircraft were advanced more than the British ones?
They introduced the forward-firing machine gun first, yes. A Dutchman called Anthony Fokker introduced the first aeroplane in 1915 with a forward-firing machine gun on the German side.
And so there were other aircraft where the machine guns, the armaments were facing out sideways.
Yes.
Fighting more in the style of a ship of the line than of a dog-fighting aircraft.
In fact, at the beginning of aerial sort of conflict, it was imagined that is how aeroplanes would fight. And so the idea was that the pilot was sat at the back with the engine behind him, and the gunner in front of him, sort of in a cockpit that was open then to the front end to all sides, so that the gunner could fire up, down and sideways to meet the threat from wherever it came.
I'm no aerial tactician, but that sounds like a brilliant solution. Why didn't that work?
Because it's very difficult to aim a moving gun at a moving aeroplane from a moving platform. Something had to be fixed, and the idea was to fix the gun to the aeroplane's line of sight, so then all one aeroplane had to do was fly directly at another and pull the trigger.
We've mentioned that the origin of aviation tactics were thought to be more naval than military in concept.
Indeed, yes.
But very quickly these gallant men found themselves thinking of themselves as cavalrymen or as knights of the air. There was a very chivalrous ethos.
There was a very chivalrous ethos. At the beginning of the war, in the period when aeroplanes were unarmed, it was not uncommon for a British pilot, if meeting a German aeroplane, to simply wave at the pilot as a fellow sort of knight of the air, and to go about their business unmolested. But of course it couldn't last. It was a war.
Well, yes, it's a great pity though, isn't it, really? What difference strategically, we've spoken of the tactics, but strategically, what difference did air power make? How important was it to control the skies?
It was vital, even with trench warfare, with constant reconnaissance carried out over the ground behind the enemy lines, then any build-up of men and materials which would sort of, as a preliminary to a new advance, could instantly be spotted, and precautions sort of taken. Either the sort of shell dumps bombed, or you know, more troops brought into the line to meet the thrust.
And of course it was a complete surprise to them. Nobody had really understood the importance of air power in warfare before.
Not really, no. In one or two sort of practice manoeuvres in the years immediately before the war, that some inkling was sort of gained of how it might be, but nobody had ever visaged trench warfare. It was always going to be a war of movement, of needing to constantly relocate a moving enemy, and that didn't happen.
Had there been an application for aircraft, a military application for aircraft before the First World War?
There were one or two sort of minor skirmishes. I think a conflict between Italy and Turkey, I believe, in about 1911 or 12 was the first military use of aeroplanes.
How did you get interested in this? It's a fascinating subject. What's your connection?
I've always been interested in aeroplanes ever since I was a small boy, starting out perhaps as you did, making models, and eventually realising that my skill as a model maker wasn't up to my skill as a critic. So I began by contributing short articles to magazines, focusing more and more on a particular sort of type of aeroplanes, those made by the Royal Aircraft Factory at Farnborough, until eventually I was invited to write a book on that subject. Yeah.
And how many books have you written now?
I've written 6 hardbacks and 5 sort of flimsier paperbacks for modellers.
We must just get the details. This latest one is Forgotten Fighters of World War One.
It is.
And who's publishing it?
It's Fonthill Media, and it's due out in a few weeks' time. It's at the printers now.
And where will it be available?
It will be available from any bookseller. I'm not going to name any names, but there's one in Freshney Place that will order it for you if you want a copy.
And Amazon?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. All right. Paul, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating subjects, and I look forward to seeing your book.